Emma Collins trusted her mother, Linda, with her life, but behind closed doors, Linda's obsession turned into a terrifying plan that no one could have imagined. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, life seemed ordinary on the surface. The Collins family lived in a modest, well-kept house, the kind that blended seamlessly into the calm streets lined with trimmed lawns and flowering gardens. Neighbors often waved and exchanged polite greetings, seeing only what appeared to be a normal family. Emma Collins, a 14-year-old girl with long brown hair and cautious eyes, seemed like any other teenager. She went to school, completed her homework, and spent quiet afternoons reading or drawing in her bedroom. To outsiders, she appeared shy but cheerful, a young girl navigating the awkwardness of adolescence. But inside the walls of the Collins home, a very different reality existed. Linda, Emma's mother, maintained a strict and controlling environment, one that few could see or understand. She was meticulous, insisting that every corner of the house be spotless and every routine followed to the letter. On the surface, her behavior seemed like standard parenting rules, discipline, and expectations for order, but behind closed doors, her control extended far beyond what anyone would consider normal. Emma's freedom was slowly being eroded, almost imperceptibly at first. Teachers and school counselors began noticing changes in Emma's behavior. She stopped participating in class discussions, her once bright and confident voice replaced by hesitant whispers. She flinched at sudden movements and seemed to shrink under the gaze of authority figures. Injuries appeared on her arms and legs, small bruises that she dismissed as accidents or minor mishaps, yet they were frequent enough to raise concern. Despite these signs, attempts to reach out went largely unanswered. Emma's fears were rooted in a deep, unspoken dread of her mother's reactions. At home, Emma's life was defined by rules she could never fully meet. Every action, every step, was scrutinized. Mistakes were punished in ways that left no marks but weighed heavily on her spirit. She learned to anticipate her mother's anger, to navigate a labyrinth of rules and restrictions that left her feeling trapped and isolated. Friends who tried to reach out often received curt replies or no response at all. The walls of her room became a prison, a place where she hid from both physical and emotional control. No one could have predicted how this growing tension, this hidden abuse, would escalate. The quiet dread that permeated Emma's life was a prelude to something far more horrifying. The very person entrusted with her care, the one who should have protected her, was quietly preparing for a plan that would shatter the illusion of safety and trust. The first chapter of Emma's tragic story was not marked by a single event but by the slow, insidious erosion of her life, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shock everyone who thought they knew the Collins family. The danger in Emma's life was not sudden. It grew quietly, almost invisibly, as her mother's control tightened. Linda's influence over the household was absolute. Every day was governed by strict schedules, precise routines, and relentless rules. Meals had to be eaten in a certain way, chores completed with perfection, and any deviation was met with disapproval or punishment. To an outsider, this might have seemed like strict parenting, but for Emma, it was suffocating. The constant scrutiny left her anxious, hesitant to speak or act, and perpetually on edge. The home that should have been a sanctuary became a place of fear, where the smallest mistake could trigger her mother's wrath. Linda's obsession with control extended beyond ordinary discipline. She began making purchases that seemed unusual but innocuous at first: zip ties, disposable mats, heavy-duty cleaning supplies, and other items that would later be revealed as tools in a sinister plan. Friends and family assumed these were for home organization or craft projects, and even Emma tried to rationalize them, telling herself her mother had some strange but harmless reason. Little did anyone know, these objects were not for tidying the house, they were part of a meticulous preparation for what was to come. Emma's school life became increasingly isolated. She stopped attending after-school programs and spent more time locked in her room, a silent prisoner of her mother's obsessive control. Attempts to reach out to peers were often discouraged or subtly sabotaged, leaving her without the small network of support she desperately needed. Teachers noticed the change, but without visible signs of abuse, they had little evidence to act on. Emma's world shrank with each passing day, until the walls of her room felt less like protection and more like confinement. The tension inside the house was palpable. Emma's every movement, from how she sat to how she spoke, was monitored and evaluated. Fear became a constant companion, a silent reminder that her life was no longer her own. Her mother's presence, once a source of comfort, had transformed into something oppressive and threatening. The small moments of resistance, hesitating to follow a rule or trying to speak her mind, were met with cold, calculated responses that reminded Emma of the absolute power her mother held. As the days passed, an unspoken sense of dread grew in Emma's chest. She could feel that her mother was planning something beyond normal discipline, though she could not understand the full scope. The subtle signs, the new purchases, the obsessive planning, the tightening grip on her daily life were pieces of a puzzle she did not know how to solve. By the time the truth would become visible to the outside world, it would be too late to stop the horror that had been quietly taking shape behind the closed doors of the Collins household. The morning of the crime began like any other in the Collins household, deceptively calm and routine. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting a warm glow across the living room. But beneath the normalcy, a terrifying plan was in motion. Linda moved with precision, following the steps she had practiced countless times. She prepared the house meticulously, arranging items in specific places and double-checking her supplies. Every detail was calculated, every action deliberate. Emma, sensing the tension, hesitated in the kitchen, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and confusion. She had learned to obey, to follow her mother's instructions without question, but an instinct deep inside warned her that this time was different. Linda forced Emma into a rigid routine, insisting she sit on a pee pad that had been placed in the center of the room. Emma's small, trembling body obeyed, confined to a space that felt both humiliating and terrifying. Linda's movements were methodical as she secured her daughter's wrists and ankles with zip ties, ensuring Emma could not move or escape. It was a cold, mechanical act, performed with a precision that suggested careful planning rather than impulse. The tools that had seemed so ordinary in recent weeks now revealed their horrifying purpose, transforming a seemingly normal household into a scene of unimaginable terror. Despite the fear that coursed through her veins, Emma's mind raced. She searched for ways to escape, to cry out, to signal anyone that she needed help. But her voice was trapped, silenced by the tight control her mother had maintained over her life. The walls that once seemed protective now loomed over her like silent witnesses to the unfolding horror. Every instinct screamed to run, yet the physical restraints and the psychological grip of her mother rendered her powerless. Outside the house, the world carried on obliviously. Neighbors mowed lawns, children played on sidewalks, and the routines of daily life continued without interruption. No one could imagine that behind the closed doors of the Collins home, a chilling act of violence was underway. Surveillance cameras in the home, installed under the guise of safety, would later reveal Emma's terrified expressions, capturing every horrifying moment that the world would come to know. In that tense, silent morning, the prelude to tragedy reached its peak. What had started as subtle control and manipulation escalated into a methodical act of cruelty. Every element, the preparation, the confinement, the restraints, showed a disturbing level of planning. The horror that had been quietly building was now fully realized, leaving Emma trapped in a nightmare crafted by the person she should have trusted the most. The calm of the morning masked the violence that would soon shock an entire community, exposing the darkness that had lurked undetected behind the doors of a seemingly ordinary home. Days passed before anyone realized something was seriously wrong. Emma's absence began to raise alarms at school, where teachers noted her unusual silence in previous weeks had now turned into a total disappearance. Friends tried calling her, sending messages, even stopping by her house, but the door remained firmly shut, and no one answered. Concern quickly turned into fear, prompting authorities to be alerted. When police arrived at the Collins household, they expected the usual story of a missing teenager, perhaps one who had run away in frustration or fear. What they discovered, however, was far more sinister. The first step into the house revealed a subtle but unmistakable sense of unease. The air carried a strange chemical smell, lingering in corners and along hallways. Rooms were unusually neat, almost sterile, as if every surface had been prepared with meticulous attention. Investigators immediately noticed that this was not a simple disappearance. Traces of preparation, items out of place, tools left in deliberate positions hinted at premeditation. Every detail inside the home seemed to tell a story that only slowly began to make sense as forensic teams combed through evidence. The living room where Emma had been confined revealed shocking details. The pea pad, once a simple household item, had become a grim marker of the horror that had taken place. Zip ties, cleaning materials, and other supplies lined the room, showing the calculated steps taken to restrain and control her. Authorities realized that this was not a crime of passion or a spontaneous act. It was a meticulously planned sequence designed to dominate, humiliate, and ultimately destroy. The extent of the planning left even seasoned investigators unsettled. Digital records and surveillance footage provided chilling confirmation. Cameras installed under the guise of safety captured Emma's every movement, every expression of fear, and every desperate attempt to resist. Each frame reinforced the premeditated nature of the crime, illustrating a mother's obsession with control and domination. The evidence painted a terrifying picture: a young girl trapped, isolated, and powerless, subjected to a series of acts that had been thought through with meticulous care. The community was shocked as the story emerged. Friends, neighbors, and family members struggled to reconcile the loving facade of the Collins household with the chilling reality inside. Experts later testified that the psychological manipulation and abuse had escalated to a point where Emma's life was entirely controlled, leaving her unable to escape or signal for help. What began as concern over a missing girl quickly became the horrifying revelation of a mother's premeditated actions, exposing a darkness that had been carefully hidden behind a veneer of normalcy. The trial of Linda Collins drew intense media attention and captivated the nation. From the very beginning, the courtroom was filled with a tense atmosphere as prosecutors laid out the meticulously documented evidence of premeditation and control. Every purchase, every surveillance recording, every calculated step leading up to the crime was presented in stark detail. Experts testified about the psychological abuse Emma had endured, describing how the gradual isolation and fear had left her powerless, unable to reach out for help. The story shocked the public. The person entrusted with a child's care could meticulously plan such a devastating act. Throughout the proceedings, Linda remained calm and composed, her demeanor unnerving to those in the courtroom. There were no visible signs of remorse, no acknowledgement of the years of manipulation and terror she had inflicted. Psychologists described her behavior as coldly calculated, a chilling example of obsessive control. For the jury, the evidence was overwhelming. They saw a mother who had not acted in a moment of anger, but had systematically stripped her daughter of autonomy, dignity, and ultimately, life. The recordings and forensic analysis provided undeniable proof of a mind meticulously planning a horrific outcome. As the trial continued, the community struggled to process the full weight of the crime. Friends and neighbors recalled interactions with Linda that, in retrospect, hinted at her controlling nature. Teachers and classmates mourned the loss of a young life filled with potential, a girl who had been silenced and trapped in a home where fear dominated every moment. Experts explained how the combination of psychological manipulation, isolation, and physical restraint created a perfect storm, making escape or resistance nearly impossible. The chilling details forced the public to confront the uncomfortable reality that appearances can be dangerously deceiving. Finally, after days of testimony and the presentation of evidence, the jury reached a verdict. Linda Collins was found guilty of premeditated murder, her calculated abuse and control, leading to a sentence that reflected the severity of her actions. The courtroom was silent as the decision was read, the weight of the crime settling heavily on all present. Outside, families and neighbors were left grappling with questions about trust, protection, and the hidden dangers that can exist behind closed doors. Emma's story became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of how abuse can be concealed beneath a veneer of normalcy. It highlighted the importance of vigilance, awareness, and intervention when warning signs emerge. Though the tragedy could not be undone, it served to educate the public about the subtle yet destructive forms of control and the devastating consequences when such darkness goes unchecked. The case remained etched in memory as a haunting example of the depths of human cruelty and the fragility of trust.